the USA Emergency Broadcast Network, your source for reliable disaster preparedness information.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily the views of this station, its management, sponsors, or other hosts. If you have any comments or suggestions about this program, please contact us at radio@usaebn.org. That's radio@usaebn.org.
Welcome to the Zeta Report here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. My name is Andre. I am the host of this show, and I co-host the show with Nancy from ZetaTalk.com. Nancy, are you there?
I'm here, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all. We have an unusual hour. It's something we've never touched on before. You know, I'm always saying, oh, you've got a garden, you've got to have chickens, you have to get going. Well, people are doing that now. We hear that the seed banks don't have any more seed to sell. They're just sold out. And baby chicks, the nurseries can't give you any right now because people want their chickens. So now people are doing this, gardening and etc. And so this is something that we have never warned about. You know, you don't tell people, go swimming in the river or go bathe in the river without mentioning that there's snapping turtles or baby crocs in there. You know, you ought to mention that at some point. So today we're mentioning some of these things. Poisonous food and what you should, just a couple of things that you should be aware of. But before we get into that, let me just mention our standard disclaimer. In partnership with USAEBN, Zeta Talk and the Zeta Report will be discussing the challenges of living on a planet beset with change. Rising seas, increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity, weather gone wild, and the worry of what to do in a worst-case scenario. We will also inject Zeta Talk prophecy on what is coming next and advice on readiness plans and safe locations. Whenever Zeta Talk is quoted, please remember that prophecy is not fact. It is opinion. It only becomes fact when it happens. The Zetas are remarkably accurate but have been wrong on occasion. Bear that in mind. For more information on this subject, please visit ZetaTalk.com or the Zeta Report on YouTube. Members of the Cucurbit family, which includes some of the most popular and sustaining vegetables eaten by humans, can give you bad indigestion and cramps. They develop a poison called cucurbitans in hot, dry weather. But don't let that put you off growing pumpkins and acorn squash to tide you over in the winter months, nor feel you must forego pumpkin pie. Toxic squash syndrome is rare and easily identified. Quoting the Daily Mail, symptoms range from crippling stomach cramps, violent vomiting, and diarrhea, in some cases severe trembling, fever, and terrifying hallucinogenic dreams. Cucumbers, squash, and pumpkin can have all the same effect. In fact, the condition has been dubbed toxic squash syndrome. They all come from a family of plants that naturally contain high levels of chemicals called cucurbitans, which protect them against insects and disease, but which are toxic to humans, even when boiled, roasted, or fried. Some experts warn that heat stress can drive up toxic levels in the veg. How can gardeners tell if their vegetables are toxic? Cut off a tiny sliver to taste, raw or cooked, and if there is the slightest hint of bitterness, discard immediately. So end of the quote. So there you have it. In hot, dry weather, water your cucurbits and then sliver check them before you take them in to eat them. It's very rare, but I think that I talked to somebody this last summer who had real drought and real heat, and they said, oh, you know, they're very bitter, and so I tossed them. So I said, we better warn people. Now there's the nightshade family. Don't eat the greenery from vegetables in the nightshade family. Nightshade is historically used as a therapeutic and as a poison, known as belladonna. But for the gardener, it is important to note that some of our most delicious and nutritious and widely used vegetables are members of the nightshade family. All this means that you should not eat the greens, the leaves, the stems, but everything else is fine. Nor should you feed those greens to your livestock. Goats will eat anything. They even eat poison ivy. So you wouldn't want to, who knows what they would eat. Tomato and potato are members of the nightshade family. Trim off any part of the potato that is green, as this means it has been exposed to the sun and, like the greens of the potato plant, will have those poisons in them. I don't think you die from toxic squash. You get an upset tummy. And I don't think you die from eating a green potato, but you probably get sick. So you don't want to get sick. Quoting Healthline.com, nightshade plants contain poisons, one called solanin. While ingesting nightshade plants can be fatal, oops, I got to take that back, can be fatal. Fruits and vegetables in this same classification of plants, many of which you find at your local grocery store, are actually safe to eat. This is because the amount of this toxic compound is lowered to non-toxic levels once the fruit and vegetables ripen. Boy, I eat sweet peppers and tomatoes all the time. Potatoes, at least one a day. Baked potatoes. So, wow. But I don't eat the greens. Now we get into the grains. Ergot is a fungus that grows on grain. It is known primarily to infect rye, but can infect wheat and grass. A small amount is not harmful, but large quantities cause constricted blood vessels, resulting in gangrene. Oh, that's lovely. And they show the pictures. You have to see my YouTube video to follow this is going to show the pictures, but you can research ergot, and it's a big black thing that looks like a grain, a long, lengthy grain. You can't miss it. It's not the grain of the wheat or rye or whatever. It stands out. A small amount, okay. Pick out the black ergot pieces or destroy the whole crop. Recovery occurs and health returns, but this whole thing about gangrene, quoting South Dakota State, cool, damp spring weather followed by warmer temperatures favor grasses becoming infected with ergot bodies. Ergot bodies appear as dark brown to black growths, replacing the seed heads of grasses and grains. The growth varies from the size of a seed kernel to several times its size. A common effect of these chemicals is a constriction of the small blood vessels to the extremities, like the ears, tail, and feet. Blood flow may be compromised and in severe cases result in gangrene or sloughing off of hooves, that's the hoof falling off, i.e., and the distal parts of ears and tails. In other words, poor livestock. I know we don't have tails, but they do. Boy, if you'd lose a hoof, what do? You have to put them down. St. Anthony fire. Too much ergot in the grain can result in constricted blood vessels, in humans too, as the medieval horror known as St. Anthony fire shows. This went on for centuries until Europe figured out that it was the dark fungus on their rye causing their problems. They suffered. They would actually take the people in the hospital rye bread made from rye that had this black kernels in it and didn't realize what they were doing until finally, several hundred years. Quoting Ranker.com, St. Anthony's fire made sufferers feel like their limbs were on fire and was caused by ergot, a fungus that could infect rye grain. Hundreds of hospitals sprang up to offer St. Anthony fire treatments, but no one knew what caused the disease, which made people's limbs turn black and fall off. The disease started with a faint burning sensation in the skin. Soon, red spots covered the infected person's body, who felt like their limbs were on fire. Then their arms would swell and turn bright red. Terrible hallucinations would plague them. Finally, gangrene would set in, and the victim's fingers and toes would drop off one by one. Wow. When the cupboard is bare and no one can go shopping, eating bugs and weeds is nature's ready diet. Insects and worms are eaten world-round and considered a delicacy in many cultures. They are cultivated, grown in compost piles, and as I always like to say, the herd does not stampede. Edible insects include grasshoppers and crickets, ants, termites, grubs, wood lice, earthworms, stink bugs, scorpions, earwigs, aphids, maggots, and dragonflies. Earthworm will happily turn your green compost pile into nitrogen-rich soil while they grow a ready protein source for your dinner plate. 82% protein, earthworms are. But there are bugs you should avoid. Where the vast majority of bugs are not only edible but fabulously nutritious, full of proteins and fats, there are a few we are advised not to consume. Despite escargot being an elite dish, especially when fried in butter and garlic, they are what they eat. If they have recently eaten nasty stuff, then you will also be eating this same nasty stuff. Restaurants feed their snails healthy stuff for weeks before serving them, lettuce or whatever. Quoting backpacker.com, they love eating poisonous plants. Cooking them doesn't boil this out either. They also carry rat lungworm, and it's as awful as it sounds. End of the quote. I don't know. I would avoid snails, just personally. Okay. There are poisonous varieties of caterpillars and spiders, too, so these should be avoided entirely. Quoting backpacker.com, who sounds like somebody who goes off in the woods and eats what he finds, right? Some caterpillars are toxic. Bright ones and hairy ones tend to be toxic, but that isn't set in stone. One of the most common edible spiders is a Thai zebra spider, but it is venomous and aggressive. Ouch. Bees and wasps are also on the do not touch list because of their stingers and what they do when they nest, when their nest is under attack. With so many edible varieties of insects and worms, why bother? If starving, one can cut off the stingers, and bee larvae can be eaten, so it's not that they'll poison you, it's just that they'll sting you. Mad cow disease. Oh, here we go. We go to the grocery store and pick out a cut of beef and some hamburger and assume all is well. But the shopper is unaware of the testing for the prions that cause mad cow disease and can infect humans to cause the human variety of mad cow. Certain parts of the cow are not packaged for human consumption nor fed to other farm animals. Now, the slaughterhouse does this. The slaughterhouse goes in and says, not the brain, not the spine, not the whatever, the lymph nodes, and they cut it away and they test the brain for mad cow, and you don't know that. If you had a catastrophe and there you are with the beef farm next to you, say, well, let's have a barbecue. Well, all that testing is done. You don't know what to do, nor maybe do you have the facility. So you could have mad cow. Quoting Wikipedia, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, commonly known as mad cow disease, is thought to be due to an infection by a protein known as a prion. The agent is not destroyed even if the beef or material containing it is cooked or heat-treated. In slaughterhouses, the brain, spinal cord, trigeminal ganglia, intestines, eyes, and tonsils from cattle are classified as specified risk materials and must be disposed of appropriately. So if you eat your neighbor's cow, bury all that stuff and don't eat it. Self-sufficient communes thrown into home gardens and free-ranging chickens due to crop failures and food shortages might also find themselves with cattle who seem to need no other care but a pasture. But come slaughter time, avoid these worrisome prion reservoirs. The brain, eyes, spinal cord, and tonsils, bury them deep. Well, we have that version of mad cow disease in deer. Scares me to death. People say, would you like some venison? No, no. Thanks. No, thanks. I'll just eat eggs and chicken. Chronic wasting disease. Hunters are well aware of the deer version of mad cow, which is called chronic wasting disease. The brain can be extracted and sent in for tests, but in a situation where such tests are not available, what to do? A staggering skinny deer should be avoided, and certainly one should not ever eat the brain. Quoting USGS.gov, chronic wasting disease has an extended incubation period averaging 8 to 24 months between infection and the onset of noticeable signs. During this time frame, animals look and act normal. The most obvious sign is progressive weight loss. Numerous behavioral changes have been reported, including decreased social interaction, loss of awareness, and loss of fear of humans. Diseased animals may also exhibit increased drinking, urination, and excessive salivation. But by the time they're staggering around and real thin and don't run away from you, it's the time frame before that when they look healthy that you need to worry about, I don't know, eggs, chicken, maybe some grubs, earthworms. That's much safer. Spirulina. Where kelp and seaweed are edible, algae comes with cautions. Spirulina is a type of blue-green algae that is an undeniable superfood, used to counteract the effects of radiation and treat cancer. But commercial blue-green algae is grown in controlled ponds which are tested to ensure no other type of algae sneaks in. They call it contamination, I think they test it. Then there's something known as the red tide. A poisonous algae is known as the red tide and occurs in seawater along coastlines. It kills fish for several weeks and contaminates some seafood while leaving other types clean to eat. Oh, lovely. Confusing. Quoting Sarasota Marine Lab, red tide occurs throughout the world, drastically affecting Scandinavia and Japanese fisheries, Caribbean and South Pacific reef fishes, and shellfishing along U.S. coasts. Filter-feeding shellfish, such as oysters, clams, mussels, and other bivalve mollusks, concentrate the toxin in various organs. Shrimp, crab, scallops, and lobster in red tide are safe to harvest and eat, since these shellfish do not accumulate the red tide toxins in the meaty or hard muscle tissue which we normally consume. Oh, all right, in addition to earthworms and eggs and chickens, I'm adding shrimp, crab, and scallops. Algae should not be confused with duckweed, which floats atop freshwater ponds like a pea-green film. Duckweed are tiny plants with a tiny root dangling down below, which is how it gathers nutrients from the pond water. Duckweed is highly edible, as one can see from the ducks that gobble it up like it was candy. It can be dried and powdered to make protein powder, too, and there are commercial enterprises that do just that. Any discussion on poisonous food should include a mention about poisonous mushrooms. There are delightful and delicious mushrooms to be picked in the woods, such as morels, and there are those that can kill you and kill you dead. If you are determined to pick wild mushrooms, perhaps starving, then at least have a good book at hand. No, why not? I mean, if you have to go out in the woods for any reason, where's that book that in your hip pocket, right? Quoting Wikipedia, mushroom poisoning is usually the result of ingestion of wild mushrooms after misidentification of a toxic mushroom as an edible species. The most common reason for this misidentification is close resemblance in terms of color and general morphology of the toxic mushroom species with edible species. In other words, they look similar. But you can tell the difference, like morels, which are delicious, and people go out hunting them in the spring. They don't really look like anything poisonous to my knowledge, which is good. So that's the end of my lecture on things to worry about: the staggering deer, the poisonous mushroom, eating, the leaves from the tomato plant, or a bitter cucurbit. And not a lot of cautions, but it's good to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cucurbit. What those? So that's the squash family, right? So that's all the big leaf vine plants.
Summer squash. That's right. Pumpkin, summer squash, acorn squash. The summer squash is the long
cucumber
green thing. I think cucumber would fit in. Yes.
Okay.
And they said if it's really bitter, you can take a sliver of it, and it sounds like it would be unmistakable. That you'd say, whoa. And the bitterness remains even if you take it in and cook it and say, well, maybe it'll be okay. It just doesn't taste right. It's too bitter, so we'll toss it. Or get a tummy ache. It won't kill you, apparently. Some things will kill you.
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah, but if you're low on water and you're in a survival situation anyway, like after a catastrophe or something, and you're already low on a lot of supplies, and you eat one of these vegetables and it gets you sick to the point of either fever or diarrhea or cramps, you're not going to be eating. I mean, all of these things are going to lead to more, like diarrhea is going to lead to dehydration if you're already low on water. I mean,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, so it's a caution to take seriously. Take it seriously. Don't grab a mushroom just because you're starving to death and find out that you're dead. That's right, and it's good to know this stuff, right?
Another thing that you can do, I was going to suggest, and I'm not sure if this is a great suggestion, but it's available. So you can get an app for your phone where you can take a screenshot or an image of a plant or a mushroom, and it will identify it for you. But this isn't going to work when the power is down. So I still think that the old trusty edible mushroom book, or or a plant identification book. They're small. They're designed for hikers. They're small, thin, and you can just flip through it. And if you don't know, err on the side of caution, please. Don't eat it if you don't know.
Yeah. I talked to somebody this summer who had a bitter summer squash, and she said that when it was out in the sun and we had the drought and the sun was hot, dry, etc., they were bitter. But the ones that set up under the trees, where the plants were under the shade of the tree and got less sunlight and were not as dried out, they were fine. So there was, ways to get around it, plant your summer squash under the tree or something,
So it's more of a heat scorch. It's more of a heat scorch / sun scorching thing that does it to the cucurbits then, huh?
I think it's hot and dry. Those are the two issues, that will. But it's really rare. I've never heard of it. Everybody around here grows squash and cucumbers and whatever and pumpkins, and I've never heard of it. So it's very rare. And the same thing, St. Anthony fire with the, fungus on the rye. We don't have that happen around here because people that are handling rye crop, I love rye. I only eat rye bread. I just adore it. So they obviously can see this, and if they see any kind of fungus on the crop, it's not sold. It's burned, or probably not given to livestock either. I'm not sure what they do with it.
Now we know what to look for, where back then they went 100 years of probably doing bloodletting and applying leeches to people.
Yes, they did.
Right.
That was the cure. I've got a headache. All right, bleed him, bleed Andre.
Get the leeches on him.
Get the leeches out. Right. Well, so much for. It's more fun to talk about. Garden. It's such fun, and it is. Putting your hands in the soil, going out and collecting those ripe tomatoes, putting all those potatoes in sacks in the basement so you go through the winter. That's the fun part. This is not the fun part, but we should mention it at some point. because we have never. It's a caution that we've never mentioned, and so now I've mentioned it. So I also wanted to touch base on what's going on with EMP, things that this is not the opinion of the Zetas or not predictions by the Zetas, but what is actually being measured by human scientists and human equipment. The Schumann Resonance is regularly measured. It's a 7.83. It's the hum of meditation. Hum is a 7.83 megahertz. And it's considered the Earth hum, and it has been spiking, since 2014 to where it goes way high, And the instruments that measure this are unable at a certain point to take the measure because it's too high. They were not designed to go that high. So then what you get, at first we were getting like white strips. They were showing the graphs, and you see, oh, it's green and it's blue and it's white, for an hour, and then it would go back to blue. And now we just get blackouts, and we get blackouts for days. So the Schumann Resonance began to have irregular surges in 2014, surging above its normal 7.83 hertz. This showed as white-hot bands on the charts. By 2017, these bands had become severe, broad, and deep, and the pace kept increasing what was happening to the Earth's magnetosphere. In the opinion of, and quoting the Zetas, the Schumann Resonance is an Earth hum caused by a broad vibration of the Earth within its own magnetic field. This is why the base wavelength of the resonance is the circumference of the Earth. There is a battle in the Earth's magnetosphere, with the Earth wanting to align with the Sun, but also being assaulted by a magnetic blast from, Nibiru. Thus, at times with a magneton overload, at other times with a throbbing pull to this or that side of the globe, as the magnetons within the Earth, in the process of flowing through in the Earth's magnetic field, are either in excess or of a dearth. So what they're saying is it's good old Nibiru causing this. They have no explanation why the Schumann Resonance has blackouts. They used to say, oh, it's the sun. The sun is, but we go through solar minimums that are so quiet, not a sunspot in sight, quieter than it's been since recorded time, and they can't say it's the sun, and there's no correlation with the timing. So then they just don't say anything. They say, okay, here's the Schumann Resonance. Sorry, there's been a blackout for a day and a half. Wow. Clear as mud, huh? Well, the dearth or excess got worse, and now in 2020 we have blackout bands that last a full day. This is explained by the site hosting Schumann Resonance as extreme swings beyond what their equipment can measure, thus the blackout. Now we have more. Petrol bubbles. Yes, little gasoline bubbles. Amateur astronomers taking photos of the region where the Nibiru rides, that's between us and the sun, slightly to the right, as we look at it from the northern hemisphere, have been capturing petrol bubbles. Per the Zetas, Nibiru formerly passed through the asteroid belt, and this was long before it became the asteroid belt. Moons of Nibiru smashed into small water-bearing planets that rode there, and thus, voila, asteroids formed from the molten magma in the cores of these small planets. The water became our long-period comets, and the organic compounds from life in these oceans swept along with the tail of Nibiru to drop to Earth to become oil deposits during every passage. Now, this is contested, by people say that oil comes from aging, rotting, moldering dinosaurs or something like that. But they can't recreate the process in the lab. The way they can't say, well, we'll put a lot of heat or pressure or do this or that, and we will have oil. They don't get it. They can't reproduce the process. The Zetas say what it is that these petrol bubbles drop during the pole shift, accumulate, sink through cracks in the ground if they don't burn up on the surface, and become our oil deposits underneath, and that's where it comes from. Well, voila, Zeta's right again, because now we're getting photographs of these petrol bubbles. They're hitting the outer atmosphere and exploding into little burning explosions that can be seen from satellites, as the Lamanovsk satellite photographed, and also coming down through the atmosphere as like little smoke bombs falling, dropping toward the ground. And people say, what the heck is that? So, in 2020, these petrol bubbles have become so thick they are blocking the view of the sun when people take it with a mylar filter or red a red spectrum filter, and there they are. It just looks like a bubble bath, taken by a frog that might be caught in a bubble bath. We have dubbed them Lomonosov bubbles, as the Lomonosov satellite released images of them exploding on the outer edge of the atmosphere in 2019, when this petrol finally had access to oxygen so it could burn. And I call it lights in the sky. You will see, we have caught that on film. Suddenly the sky is light, and then it's not. This is not the auroras. This is not an explosion. This is not lightning. So what is it? Well, these bubbles, when they burn, of course, now you have the light. This has been captured on film this year in Australia, looking like some kind of a grid over the sun. A guy took a naked eye photo, and you could see what looked like a grid. And of course they were asking the Zetas, what the heck is that? Once again, the Zetas explain why the bubbles have taken on a grid appearance, and I quote, oil droplets have a surface tension that allows the bubbles or droplet to hold its shape. Each bubble wants to retain its shape and not merge into larger bubbles. In space, the petrol bubbles in the tail of Nibiru will, by preference, spread out, keeping a regular distance from each other. And then it looks like a grid, from a distance, because they are, all right, 6 feet apart, no COVID infection here. Well, no, not COVID, but you know what I'm saying. They want a set distance. Do these bubbles drop down through the atmosphere? Yes, and is captured by a garage surveillance cam in Ohio in January 2020. The sky suddenly became bright. Not lightning, not an explosion, just a brief, bright light. Now a video capture from Brazil has captured a petrol burn from a dropping petrol bubble in the lower atmosphere. First, smoke appears, then a flash of light, then dropping balls of light. And we have a greasy appearance just within this last couple of days from Corona, California. It looks like rainbow greasy. It's not a rainbow. Rainbows are always, they go in a curve or in a line, but this is a greasy thing that's dropping and taking on a rainbow appearance on all edges, and it looks like an amoeba. There's several of them dropping. That can only be greasy air. And the Zetas have referred to the grease from the tail of Nibiru quite often over the years. And we're going to have more of that, folks. And when you see it, you'll know what it is. And there is also a caution in the opinion of the Zetas when we have a passage of Nibiru and you're anywhere near a volcano, where you can have this grease go over the heat, and therefore, it's like cracking to make oil into gasoline or whatever they call it, cracking the petrols. Well, things can happen in the presence of heat, and it sets these petrols on fire so that anywhere near a volcano you could have a falling blanket of fire. This has been recorded in antiquity. around the Mediterranean, around the West Coast Indians, etc. And it's a caution. Do not be out in the open near a volcano when the pole shift happens, when that hour of the pole shift happens, because blankets of fire can form and drop, and you want to be under some sort of a covering, a metal sheet of tin or anything, or in the basement, but don't be out in the yard saying, ooh, look, ouch. All right, so I wanted to move on, if we still have time, and talk a little bit about the New Madrid and the prongs. Are you with me, Andre? Do we have time?
Yeah, we've got about you got about 8 minutes left, so yeah.
All right. Andre and I wanted to mention that it seems awfully quiet on the New Madrid this last month, and I agree. It seems like it closed down. There was no progress. Now, the fact that we're fighting to have the election process happen and happen fairly without election fraud and the like, and it's just so volatile. Many people don't believe the polls at all, etc. And yet, there's a lot of cleanup of the deep state, a lot of mischief, pedophile blackmail material, and missing children being discovered. And I won't go into it, but the bottom line is, in the battle of good and evil, it would be better not to have a disruption during this next month when the election is pending, but let the election happen and let the good guys remain in charge of the United States. That's my theory, Nancy's theory. So what if we got, the Council of Worlds might have said, wait a minute, put a hold on the New Madrid, stop it. And don't have any big earthquakes. Just wait until after the election, because it sure seems like that. Andre and I were noting that, just today and yesterday, the Azores had some quakes, and that's where it rips open so that the water, from the separating Atlantic pours in and rebounds and goes toward Europe in the predicted Zeta talk, a European tsunami. And the tip of Mexico is getting a lot of quakes, which is where the Zeta said we should watch, because that's going to be a clue that here we go. And Andre noted some hot spots in the Wabash Valley, which is there along the Mississippi where the whole thing starts. So we're seeing activity, but it's not the big rip yet. But we're expecting that.
My only input on that one is some of these hot spots, like it started a couple of days ago, but it's been ongoing, but it's really ramped up in the last couple of days. And the reports I've seen on the hot spots are right around the curve, around New Madrid, the town of New Madrid, where the last quake was, where the matching or the edges of the plates would be the rip zone there. And then continuing on from the Wabash through New Madrid down even to Louisiana, Baton Rouge area, showing heat stress in the bayou, which bayous don't burn. That's water. So it's not people burning, the usual suspects. It's like, the excuses that may come out. Well, it's just crop burning. It's just farmers burning their crops. I'm like, okay, that's bayou. It's water, so no. And, so it's just something to look into. It's like some of these factors don't get reported, and or the quakes are undervalued or underreported as well. So it's just something to keep an eye on. And if it all starts happening at the same time, then it's also something to look at.
Right, exactly. We're expecting it, but for some odd reason now, which I have my own personal theories, it's been kind of quiet from what it was in the months before, but not gone away and still before us. We still have to prepare. And I have a couple of minutes. I wanted to go through what I call the prongs. Back in 2016, we had an introduction by astronomers, which I call the Zetas called it the multi-prong approach to explaining Nibiru. How did it sneak in here, with nobody noticing, and is it threatening the Earth and pending for a passage? I mean, it's a big planet, so how could it? It's causing us to have a sunrise and sunset that are not in the right place. All this red dust, blah blah blah. So they were getting ready, and we got quite a ways into the 2016 prongs, and then it just stopped. But we may have a revisit. According to the Zetas, in the opinion of the Zetas, we might get back into that where we introduce people to Nibiru again. So I just wanted to give a brief history on the 2016 prongs. Let's see, several European and U.S. astronomers to educate the public about Nibiru. The Zetas call this the multi-prong approach. They started in 2016 with the discovery of Planet 9. Remember that? Located out in the direction of the constellation Orion. The Zetas quickly noted that Planet 9 was not Nibiru, but a gravity tug from Nemesis, the Sun's binary. And then a blitz of articles about exoplanets and brown dwarf planets emerged. Exoplanets had been increasingly in the news since 2014 and were often being described as rogue planets, travelers found wandering through space afar from their suns. Does this sound like Nibiru? Indeed it does. Lund University in Sweden provided the concept of planets caught between two binary suns. Since Nibiru has two foci, our Sol and the Sun's dark binary out in space in the direction of Orion, this once again sounded like an introduction to Nibiru is in process. In July 2016, the cast of characters was introduced. All were from the U.S. and Europe. By August 2016, the concept of a retrograde orbit was introduced. Nibiru has always been known by the ancient Greeks as having a retrograde orbit when it makes a passage past our Sun. So this was a key step in the introduction of Nibiru to the public. And by September 2016, when the discovery of Proxima b was announced, the Dark Energy Survey in Chile was introduced. If Nibiru was to be announced, how to explain that NASA never noticed it creeping into our solar system? NASA scans the sky but does not scan in the direction of Orion. But the Dark Energy Survey, using infrared, did and does scan that part of the sky. Thus, if a traveling Nibiru were to be discovered on star charts, it would be those from the Dark Energy Survey where this path would be discovered. But by March 2017, NASA had grabbed the reins, directing the public to examine their WISE charts, W-I-S-E charts, which in no way could contain images of Nibiru. I mean, it wasn't pointing in the right direction. Planet 9 and Nemesis and Nibiru were all located in the direction of the constellation Orion, and WISE did not map that region. The prongs had failed. What went wrong? Per the Zetas, President Trump wanted Russia to participate in an announcement, but Putin wanted the U.S. to admit that the cover-up had been at Ronald Reagan's hand via an executive order. In other words, we come down to who's to blame. And well, we can blame Reagan. Yes, but, why didn't you reverse his executive order? Well, and they got into that business. And so it stopped. And in the spring of 2017, that's it. The Dark Energy Survey out of Chile was still hopeful. They detailed the technique used by the Zeta Talk fans in 2001 to 2003 to image the inbound Nibiru, and I still have all that stuff available. Anyone can see it and find it. Basically, this technique used by the Zeta Talk given coordinates for Nibiru at a given date, and then they searched the star charts for an unknown star at that location at that given date, and we'd find it. The team found a dim traveling star, and that it moved along to the next location identified by the Zetas for that next date. The Zeta Talk team still has their FITS files, F-I-T-S files, in the search are available, and several of our mirror sites we have that. So they could be examined for verification. But finding that traveling exoplanet on the dark energy survey charts, that would be official. Is it about to happen? And the Zetas are saying that may be something that the international community has decided they just have to tell people about Nibiru. You can't just ignore it until it becomes some red riding thing in the skies. And we're in the last weeks, and there's no time to get to Highlands, no time to get your chickens and gardens and learn about, Nightshade family or whatever the heck. You got to give people a chance to say, I'm not paying my mortgage here on the coast. The bank doesn't count. My family counts. I have to get to Highland, to Uncle Bob's farm. I have to learn how to use manual tools to repair furniture or whatever, put up a barn. I have to study the neighboring Amish to find out how they do it without electricity. I have to get seeds because gardening there's a learning curve here. You kill your plants in a hurry if you don't know what you're doing. It's not as simple as dribbling some seeds on the ground and saying, well, then later on I'll go out and pick up the strawberries. You need a season or two to learn. Chickens, they're wonderful, but they need to be protected. You need to identify the brooder among your ladies, and make sure she has a safe spot, because all the other hens will lay their eggs in her nest, and she'll sit on a pile of them like a mountaineer, and keep them all warm and be the mama that shows them how to drink and the like. There are things about, this is flock psychology. You don't know it unless you have them or read books, and so you need to get started, and it's not fair not to tell people about this threat that is coming in for a passage, and they know darn well it's going to do that. It happened 3,600 years ago. In the when the Red Sea parted and let Moses go through, it happened 3 times 3,600 years ago when all the mastodons died up there in Wrangel Island and froze to death. What is a grass-eating elephant doing in an island up there in the Arctic? Well, it wasn't up there in the Arctic at the time. So we have the history, and we know this happens every 3,600 years, and we just don't talk about it. We just head in the sands. So there are astronomers worldwide that are getting impatient with this and feel they must step forward and risk all. And if they all say it simultaneously with a big voice, and so you should anticipate this might happen in the opinion of the Zetas. This might happen. We may go back to pronging, a multi-prong approach. And I'm talked out. Andre, have you got anything to say?
Nope, that's great. Looking forward to more information from the pronging, if that continues. I mean, we shall see. I think we have to get through the next step of the election before anything happens. So, or any more information comes out officially.
Yes.
So, that's all the time we have today, Nancy. Thank you for being here and doing what you do. And
you too, Andre.
All right. Have a great day.
Okay, folks. Talk to you next month. Bye-bye now.